Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah chapter 6, Halacha 1, and the Mishnah is going to get into this dispute between Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel regarding the property that somebody declares ownerless, hefker. Before we were talking about what happens if you're leaving grain to be, or bundles, or you're leaving peah to be hefker, and you're making terms and you're saying, oh, this hefker is only for the rich, and we know that Bet Shammai is saying that that's a valid designation. Bet Hillel is saying that's not a valid designation. You can't make any exclusions when you're making hefker. It has to be open to everybody. This Mishnah is going to be great because it's going to help us to get a deeper idea about this idea from Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. It's now going to go to property. So it's, there is a change here, and it does have a lot of implications. And another thing that I like about this is that it's going to help us to get a richer understanding, because Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai are both going to be pulling from text in the Torah to prove their point scripturally, and you're going to see how the mind of Bet Shammai is working and the mind of Bet Hillel is working on each of these textual points, and how they're going to interpret them differently. So I think that's a really neat point about this Mishnah and this Gemara. Mishnah comes off and says, Bet Shammai says, produce that was declared ownerless for the poor, in other words, the owner qualifies his declaration by stipulating that it should be available for acquisition by poor people only. So Bet Shammai comes and says, no rich people can take this. This is only for the poor. The Mishnah says, is in fact deemed ownerless. So that, according to Bet Shammai, is a valid statement for hefker. We know that Bet Hillel is going to say no. Mishnah says, but Bet Hillel says it is not deemed ownerless at all, even for the poor, unless he declares it ownerless for the rich also, as is the case with Shemitah produce. So the Rashi here is pointing out from his commentary in Leviticus 25:2 that Bet Hillel maintains that a hefker declaration that limits the potential of acquisition to poor people has no legal effect, and that the verse is saying that it's available for acquisition to all. That means poor and rich alike. So the Rosh says, therefore, produce that was declared hefker for the poor does not become ownerless at all and remains subject to meiser. So that's a key point. That's a key point. By making sure that it's not subject to hefker, that this, because it's not hefker, still has meiser. That's the deep point by the Rosh. So the other point is that the dispute between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai regarding hefker is going to be well. Let me just move on. So the Mishnah returns to the discussion begun at the end of the preceding chapter regarding the shchicha obligation. If all the sheaves of the field are each the size of one calf, and one is the size of 4 kavim, and they forgot that unusually large one, Bet Shammai says it is not shchicha, and it may be retrieved by the owner. And Bet Hillel says it is shchicha and it must be left by the poor. Let's explain it. So the Gemara is going to get into the reasoning for Bet Shammai's point, but let's actually talk about what the Gemara is going to say, and let's just get to it from there. The Gemara cites a source for Bet Shammai's ruling that declaring produce ownerless for the poor is going to be an effective declaration. Rabbi Peah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the scriptural basis for the ruling of Bet Shammai is as follows. So they're not taking it out of nowhere. They're taking it from this amazing tradition that the sages had back in the time where they were able to pull out halacha from the scripture. And by the way, there's no one alive today who really knows how to do it. And that's why we have to rely on this tradition. So Rabbi Peah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the scriptural basis for the ruling of Bet Shammai is as follows. In the passage that discusses the Peah and Leket obligation, that's, by the way, Leviticus 23:22, the Torah could have simply said, for the poor person and the converts. The Torah, by the way, says the Ritva in the note in Baba Metzia 30b, states that with respect to Peah and Leket, for the poor person and the convert, you shall leave them. Now, the final clause in this verse is seemingly extra, as the verse could have conveyed the same point by saying, the poor person and the convert, they shall be. So it's written in a way where it looks like it's extra, and that's what Bet Shammai is going to be catching on. So what does the Torah teach by stating the additional clause, you shall leave them? It teaches, says Rabbi Yochanan, that you shall have another leaving, which is a hefker declaration, that is similar to this one. Just as this leaving of Peah and Leket is specifically for the poor and not for the rich, so too that leaving which is stated elsewhere, in other words, a hefker declaration, which is not directly related to the topic of the verse. And the Gemara continues, says, so too, that leaving which is stated elsewhere is effective when it is specifically for the poor and not for the rich. So Mara Fulda comments and says, by stating the words, you shall leave them, these extra words, right? The verse informs us that one can voluntarily give his ordinary produce the same status as Peah and Leket by making it ownerless for poor people alone. The produce is therefore exempt from Meiser, just as Peah and Leket are. That's a very big point. So the Gemara will later explain that according to this approach of Rabbi Yochanan, Beit Hillel derives their opinion by explaining the verse of Peah and Leket in actually the opposite manner. So they're both getting onto this extra verse. They both sense that this is an extra verse in the pasuk in Leviticus 23:22, and they're both coming to try to interpret it and try to say what the halacha is. But this is a case where they come up with opposite interpretations, and it matters because by one way it'll be subject to Meiser because it's not a valid declaration, and the other way it will be a valid declaration and not subject to Meiser. Very big difference. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, the scriptural basis for the ruling of Bet Shammai is as follows. So he's going to explain it. Right now, they're not arguing. They're just explaining. Right now, Rabbi Yochanan took this extra verse to explain Bet Shammai's point, and now Shimon ben Lakish, who's not yet arguing, is going to be explaining Bet Hillel's point with this extra verse. So the scriptural basis for the ruling of Bet Hillel is as follows. Says the Gemara, in the passage that discusses the laws of Shemitah, the Torah could have simply said, and in the 7th year you shall release it. what does the Torah teach by stating the additional expression and abandon it? It teaches that you have another abandonment, a hefker declaration, that is similar to this one. Gemara continues, says, just as this abandonment of Shemitah produce is for both the poor and the rich, so too that abandonment, which is stated elsewhere, which is also a hefker declaration, which is not directly related to the topic of the verse, is effective only when it makes the produce available for both the poor and the rich. That is the Gemara. So let's unpack it. And in Exodus 23:11, it reads, "And in the 7th year you shall release the land and abandon it." So the point that Beit Hillel is saying, says Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, is that it could have just said, "And in the 7th year you shall release it." So they're asking, what is the Torah teaching by looking at this extra word that's in here and abandon it? So it's saying, says Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, according to how he's interpreting Beit Hillel, it teaches that you have another abandonment, a hefker declaration that's similar to this one, just as this abandonment of Shemitah produce is for both the poor and the rich, and so too, says the Gemara, that abandonment, which is stated elsewhere, is effective only when it makes produce available for the poor and the rich. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is maintaining that the parameters of a hefker declaration are derived not from the verse of Peah and Leket. Okay, he's going to the Shemitah thing. He's not proving it. He's saying that Beit Hillel is not proving it from this verse. They're proving it from the Shemitah verse. Okay. The explanation here, okay, informs us that a voluntary abandonment of produce must resemble the state of Shemitah produce, which is freely available to everyone, rich and poor. And only when produce is declared ownerless does it become hefker and exempt from meiser. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is saying that Beit Hillel is proving this clause about rich and poor from the Shemitah produce. And when you leave the Shemitah produce, it's available to everyone. Rich and poor can take it. And that's why, according to Beit Hillel, if you say, I'm leaving this to be hefker, but only for the poor and not for the rich, it's not a valid hefker because it is not like how they're deriving it from the Shemitah verse, which is that it has to be available to everyone. Very deep insight. Rabbi Yochanan's view, Beit Shammai, that they're deriving their ruling from this extra verse, you shall leave them, and that, by the way, is in the passage of Peah and Leket. So the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yochanan, how does Beit Hillel deal with the verse that serves the basis for the ruling of Beit Shammai? In other words, okay, very nice that Beit Hillel is proving this point from the Shemitah produce, but what do Beit Hillel say about what does Beit Shammai say with this extra verse over here dealing with Peah and Leket? How do they handle it? It's a very good question. The Gemara is going to answer that. Beit Hillel, says the Gemara, explains the verse, you shall leave them. So this, by the way, is how they're explaining the Peah and Leket verse that Beit Shammai is talking about. It says, you shall leave them as conveying a limitation, so that the verse is understood to be saying, this leaving of Peah and Leket is indeed designated for the poor only and not for the rich. But that leaving, which is stated elsewhere for a hefker declaration, is effective unless it is designated for both the poor and the rich. So the Rosh says here, Beit Hillel explains this word otam, them, as an exclusionary term that restricts Peah and Leket, a certain aspect of the law stated in the verse. And the Rosh is saying about the rest of what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. He's saying that the expression you shall leave teaches that one generally has the ability to declare his produce ownerless. The additional word otam, them, limits the scope of this ability, explains the Rosh, by implying that it is only with regard to them, the Peah and Leket, discussed explicitly by the verse. And that produce can be left only for the poor. We know that, right? Leket and Peah is only for the poor. Produce, continues the Rosh, that is made ownerless by virtue of a hefker declaration, however, must be designated for both the poor and the rich, because they are deriving this, is what I'm saying, from the Shemitah, the way the Shemitah obligation is done, which is available to both the poor and the rich. They're not proving this from here. They're saying, Beit Hillel is saying that this extra word is only talking about Peah and Leket, and that this extra word means that the Leket and the Peah, when it is true Peah and Leket, can only be picked up by the poor and not by the rich. That extra word, they're saying, comes to invalidate the rich from picking it up, but this is only with regards to Peah and Leket, where this verse is found, and not a hefker declaration. Rosh continues and says, Rabbi Yochanan maintains that the verse regarding Peah and Leket is the source for the rulings of both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And in this, he disputes Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who cited the verse regarding the Shemitah as a source for Beit Hillel's ruling. That says the Rosh. So Rabbi Yochanan now is in debate with Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and he's saying that about that the Shemitah being the source of Beit Hillel's ruling on this, that's not over there, it's over here. Okay, the Gemara answers, and well, actually, having clarified Rabbi Yochanan's approach, the Gemara proceeds to analyze the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish that Beit Hillel derives their ruling from this extra expression and abandon it. That's talking about what the Torah states with regarding Shemitah. Gemara says, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, how do Beit Shammai deal with the verse that serves as a basis for the ruling of Beit Hillel? Now they're going to be asking the opposite question. Gemara answers, says, Beit Shammai explains the phrase, you shall release it and abandon it, as conveying a limitation. So they're all saying it's a limitation. Rosh Cirillo explains this as saying the suffix of the hey here, it, implies that an aspect of the law under discussion pertains specifically to Shemitah produce and not to ordinary produce that was left hefker. So the Gemara says, Beit Shammai explains the phrase, you shall release it and abandon it, as conveying a limitation, so that the verse is understood to mean this abandonment of Shemitah produce is designated for both the poor and the rich. But that abandonment, which is stated elsewhere, this hefker declaration, is effective even when it is designated for the poor and not for the rich. So I want to just explain this with the Rosh again. So this extra term, and abandon it, teaches that one can declare his produce ownerless just like Shemitah produce. This is the explanation by Bet Shammai of this verse. And the extra hey, it, teaches further that a hefker declaration, unlike Shemitah, may be designated for poor people only. The implication, says the Rosh, is that the Shemitah produce discussed explicitly by the verse, must be left for both the poor and the rich alike, but produce that is voluntarily declared ownerless may be left even for the poor. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai derive their respective opinions from the verse regarding Shemitah. This is a variance with Rabbi Yochanan's assertion that Beit Shammai derives their ruling from the verse regarding Peah and Lakish. So that's a big disagreement. The last discussion, what we were just talking about, it emerges that the source of Beit Hillel's ruling is a matter of dispute. Rabbi Yochanan holds that Beit Hillel derives their opinion from this exclusionary term stated in the passage of Peah and Lakish. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is holding that Beit Hillel derives their opinion from the explanation of the extra verse in Shemitah. So the Gemara now is going to talk about, support for the other side. So we're going to talk about support for this approach by Shimon ben Lakish. Keep in mind, they're not arguing about whether Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai is right. They're arguing about how Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are deriving this. So both are looking at the Shemitah verse. Both are looking at the Peah and Lakish verse. Both are looking at the extra words there. Okay, they're both looking at the extra letter that's there. Okay, and they're both deriving halacha from it. But what they're arguing about is what is the source of what Beit Hillel's proof is. Okay. Rabbi Avin says the language of the Mishnah supports the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish that Beit Hillel's view regarding hefker is derived from the Shemitah passage. For the Mishnah states, but Beit Hillel say it is not deemed ownerless unless he declares it ownerless for the rich as well, as is the case with Shemitah produce. So the Rosh says that by stating that hefker must be declared ownerless for all people, as in the case with Shemitah produce, Beit Hillel indicates that their position regarding hefker is, in fact, coming from this scriptural analogy to Shemitah, as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is pointing out. Rabbi Yochanan holds that Beit Hillel is deriving their opinion from the verse of Peah and Lakish rather than the verse of Shemitah, is forced to say that the Mishnah mentions Shemitah merely as a model for the proper way to declare something ownerless, namely that hefker must be designated for rich and poor alike, just like Shemitah produce, which is available for acquisition by rich people as well as poor people. That's the comment by the Rosh to help us understand it. And the Gemara is gonna explain Rabbi Yochanan's point, and then we'll finish up. So the Gemara discusses the halachic ramifications of the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish regarding the source of Beit Hillel's ruling. Right now, all we're arguing about is the source of how Beit Hillel is deriving this. Okay, this is the argument. Gemara reads, if one declares produce hefker for animals, but not for people, or for idol worshippers, but not for Jews, or for the rich, but not for the poor. All, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the Gemara says, all agree that his hefker is not effective hefker, because it resembles neither the Shemitah produce, which is ownerless vis-a-vis all people, nor Peah and Leket, which is intended for the Jewish poor. So they're not arguing about this. Okay, they're arguing about the source of Beit Hillel's ruling. Mara Fulda comments from the Rosh and says the following. It says, if the paradigm for hefker declarations is the law of Shemitah, as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish maintains, it is impossible for one to affect a state of ownerlessness that excludes humans in general, or even a particular subset of people. And similarly, if the source for the general concept of hefker is the law of Peah and Leket, as Rabbi Yochanan maintains, that Beit Hillel maintains, then one's hefker declaration must not be exclusive of Jews or poor people. That's the point by the Mara Fulda from the Rosh. So let's continue. And all agree, okay, just the note by the Gemara says all agree that his hefker is not effective hefker. If you're saying it's hefker for animals, not for Jews, idol worshippers, but not for Jews, rich, but not for poor, everyone agrees that hefker is not hefker, okay? Bet Shammai wouldn't agree, but there's no disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, okay? Because it does not resemble either the Shemitah produce or the Peah and Leket produce, which is intended for the Jewish poor, and the Shemitah produce, which is ownerless for all people, okay? Gemara continues, says, if, however, one declares produce hefker for people, but not for animals, or for Jews, but not for idol worshippers, or for the poor of the city, but not for the poor of a different city, the effectiveness of his declaration, according to Beit Hillel, is contingent upon the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Very interesting. So, in this, says the Rosh, this does not mean that the owner excluded rich people from being able to acquire the produce, for such a declaration would be ineffective according to Beit Hillel. Rather, the intent here is that he declared the produce ownerless on account of his city's poor. The dire poverty of the city is what spurred him to declare the produce hefker. The declaration itself, however, was inclusive of all the city's residents, so rich people and poor people alike, but only the residents of other cities are excluded, says the Rosh. And that now is going to be the question. Now you're saying, hey, I have hefker here, and this hefker here, rich and poor can take it, but only in this city. Not in that city. People from that city can't come take it, just the people here. But rich or poor, no problem. Is that going to be a valid declaration? So this is now going to be the dispute between, in terms of halacha, between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's point. According to the view of Rabbi Yochanan, says the Gemara, that Beit Hillel derives the law of hefker from the passage of Peah and Leket. His hefker is an effective hefker. So why is that an effective hefker? Vilna Gaon comes and answers for us, helps us out, and says that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the critical factor in determining the validity of a hefker declaration, according to Beit Hillel, is that the produce must not resemble Peah and Leket with regard to being made available only for the poor, and certainly it may not exclude the poor. So using this criterion, any hefker declaration, explains the Vilna Gaon, that encompasses rich and poor alike is effective, even if it excludes animals, idol worshippers, or the residents of another city. But the Gemara says, according to the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that Beit Hillel's ruling is derived from the Shemitah passage. his hefker is not an effective hefker because it is not analogous to the Shemitah produce. So, Hazanish in Shvius chapter 14, uh, um, Halacha 4, his comment over there says like this. Hazanish explains that since according to Shimon ben Lakish, Beit Hillel derives the parameters of hefker from the law of Shemitah, a hefker declaration, therefore, may not contain any exclusion whatsoever, for it must be similar to the Shemitah produce, which is available freely to all people and even to animals. This is the note by the Chazanish. So that's a good point. In other words, if it's going to look like hefker from the passage where you're deriving it from the Shemitah produce, you have to leave it for everyone, even for animals. So excluding people from other cities and excluding animals does not look like the hefker from Shemitah, and because it doesn't, then it's not a real hefker, because even animals are allowed to eat Shemitah produce. So if it's like Rabbi Yochanan's point of what Beit Hillel is saying, and they're deriving it from the passage of Peah and Leket, the Peah and Leket is not excluding, is only, all it's excluding is people from another city. So that would be an effective hefker according to Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara comments, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Law said, there is no need to infer the position of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish on this matter from their dispute regarding Beit Hillel's reasoning, for they actually disagree explicitly about this issue. Rabbi Yochanan said that if one declares produce hefker for people but not for animals, or for Jews but not for idol worshippers, or for the poor of the city but not the poor of another city, his hefker is a valid hefker. That's the point of Rabbi Yochanan, according to what Rabbi Law is explaining. The Gemara continues, says, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said that in these instances, his hefker is not an effective hefker. Baba Mitzia in the Bavli, page 30b, comment by the Rosh over there, says the Gemara states that a hefker declaration which excludes even a single person is invalid, and this appears to coincide with the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. That's the comment over there by the Rosh. So, very interesting here. I want to point out a comment here from the Rosh, whose approach follows that there's a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish regarding the source for the opinions of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. The Rambam is going to cite the verse of Peah and Leket as the source of Bet Shammai's ruling, and that, by the way, is stated by Rabbi Yochanan, and the verse of Shemitah as the source of Bet Hillel's ruling, and that's stated by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So, in the Rambam's understanding, the explanations of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish complement each other and do not really represent conflicting viewpoints. So, that's another way to look at this give and take, and it could suggest that the Rambam is understanding this concluding statement of Rabbi Law as rejecting the previous assumption that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish were arguing, and it could be looked at as being stated rhetorically and basically as a question. Did Rabbi Yochanan and did Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish explicitly disagree about this issue? And the Rambam is basically saying no. There's no reason to presume that there's any dispute between them, but that this concluding statement is actually, by Rabbi Law, is actually rejecting the previous assumption, this assumption between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. So that sort of smooths things over. The Gemara is going to consider whether a rich person is able to acquire an object that was declared hefker for the poor only. And according to Bet Shammai, that is an effective declaration. Bet Hillel says no. Rabbi Avin Bar Chia says, regarding objects that were declared hefker for the poor and rich people took possession of them, the disposition of those objects is a matter of dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. The Mara Fulda says the Gemara is referring to a Tanaic dispute recorded in the Yerushalmi and deriving, chapter 4, Halacha 10, Bavli deriving 43a, regarding the verse at which an object that was declared hefker leaves the possession of the owner. Rabbi Meir maintains that the object is rendered ownerless immediately. That is, the owner instantly forfeits his title to the object, according to Rabbi Meir, even before another party acquires it. This, by the way, is the explanation by the Mara Fulda for it. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, maintains that a hefker declaration merely allows other people to acquire the object, but until this actually happens, it remains the property of the original owner. So that's what's coming up over here. According to Rabbi Meir, says the Gemara, who says that as soon as a person declares something hefker, it leaves his possession, his hefker is an effective hefker, even with respect to a rich person being able to take possession of it. Vilna Gaon says, Rabbi Meir, Vilna Gaon is going to explain Rabbi Meir's point. Rabbi Meir holds the moment one declares an owner object ownerless, even if only for the poor, according to Bet Shammai, it is no longer his. Hence, it may thereupon be acquired even by rich people. For once the object is left the possession of the owner, all conditions that he attached to it by dint of ownership fall away, says the Vilna Gaon to explain this. So the Gemara reads, his hefker is an effective hefker, even with respect to a rich person being able to take possession of it. But according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that an object declared hefker does not leave the possession of its owner except through acquisition by another party, his hefker is not effective hefker with respect to a rich person being able to take possession of it. Mara Fulda explains this as says, in Rabbi Yossi's view, an object that was declared hefker remains the property of the owner until someone acquires it. And in this case, therefore, the object cannot be considered truly ownerless until one of his intended recipients, like a poor person, takes possession of it. Hence, should a rich person take the object, he will not acquire it, for it still belongs to the owner. That is the explanation by the Mara Fulda. I want to take a look at Rabbi Kanievsky's view on this, and we'll finish up. Rabbi Kanievsky is holding that that it is certainly forbidden for a rich person to take produce that was declared ownerless for the poor, and if he does so, it amounts to stealing. So the issue under discussion, says Rabbi Kanievsky in his Biur Shiurim, saying the issue under discussion is whether such produce that was illegally taken by a rich person is nonetheless exempt from a Meiser obligation. According to Rabbi Meir's position, the produce became hefker and thus permanently exempt from Meiser obligation upon being declared ownerless from the poor. Rabbi Kanievsky continues and says, thus, if a rich person subsequently appropriates the produce and instead of returning it to the poor, as he's obligated to do, he decides to eat it, there is no requirement for him to tithe the produce beforehand. However, according to Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Kanievsky, the produce remains in the possession of the owner and it retains its meiser obligation until it is acquired by a poor person. If a rich person who cannot legally acquire the produce were to take it, it would still be subject to meiser since it technically has not yet become ownerless. This is the disagreement between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi in an explanation of it, and this is what's being explained in the Gemara by Rabbi Avid Bar Chia. So that concludes for today. Thank you.